7:47. Welcome back to BT Vancouver on a Friday. Well, calls for police reform are sweeping across North America as part of the protest movement against anti-black racism and police brutality against people of color. Joining us now to continue the conversation is MP for Vancouver Granville and former Attorney General Jody Wilson-Raybould. Good morning, Jody. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Mary.
So let's start with the videos that have surfaced in recent weeks here in Canada of how some in the Indigenous community have been treated by police. Most people watching these videos were shocked and disgusted. What was your reaction?
I mean, I had very similar reactions. It was awful to watch some of those videos, and I think that Canadians have a right to be outraged. And bottom line for me, watching those videos, recognizing that it is not something that is isolated in terms of incidents, made me incredibly sad, and recognize we have a lot of work to do as a country to address issues of race.
Absolutely, yes. And I want to get into the video that surfaced yesterday of Chief Alan Adams' arrest in Fort McMurray. For our viewers that are just tuning in, he was pulled over for having an expired license plate and ended up being charged with resisting arrest and assaulting a police officer. Now, as a lawyer, former Minister of Justice, what is your reaction to this latest development in this story?
Well, I think that we can all formulate opinions in terms of the use of force, the excessive use of force that seems to be reflected in these videos. Of course, there's going to be an investigation, and that's entirely appropriate. But any person, whether you've been the Minister of Justice or not, can look at these videos and recognize the excessive use of force that was used. And there's a need to look at why these practices or the actions taken by officers is happening, and why it's appropriate. Of course, it's not appropriate, and it needs to be addressed.
There has been a call for national action, international action. What do you think needs to be done as quickly as possible when it comes to funding and, structural framework? We know this problem can't be solved overnight. This problem is deeply rooted. But what can we start doing right now?
Well, again, I think taking concerted action and doing investigations around these incidences, recognizing that these incidences, as I said, are not isolated. They exist. Many of the incidents that happen are just not caught on film, or it's not a leader, a chief in Alberta. But we have to take a serious look at our institutions, the way our institutions and the operating practices of our institutions have continued to function, the racism, systemic racism that exists in these institutions, and break it down and ask questions why this happens. Our institutions and how they function are a reflection of our society, and as a society, we need to stand up and we need to say once and for all, if not now, when, that enough is enough, and we need to change the way that we look at marginalized individuals in our society, and support and address the issues that continue to keep them marginalized.
Do you have hope that action will be taken, and we're not just going to be talking about this for another few weeks? Do you have hope that this will be that this will enforce positive change?
Well, I am a glass half full person. Of course I have hope, and we can look across the country and see significant successes in Indigenous communities. There are models that are working around community policing in Indigenous communities. We need to look at these models, and we need to continue to have these conversations. I mean, one of the things that bothers me about politics is that politicians always seem to say the right thing when the media spotlight is on the issue. But the test for us as a society, as Canadians, is to ensure we keep these stories in the media, that we keep talking about them, and that our nice words and our talk turns into concrete action and restructuring.
As an Indigenous woman, what would you say to the average person who wants to start moving the needle? What would you say to someone who wants to start taking action right now?
I would say keep involved. learn the history of our country, read reports like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission report, the report in the calls for justice in the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls report that came out just over a year ago. Get involved and know your neighbor. Understand, if we're talking about Indigenous peoples, understand and get to know the Indigenous community in your area. I mean, we all have an important role to play in knowing and learning from each other and changing some of the darker chapters in our country's history into a positive path forward.
Do you feel more people are starting to take an interest in Indigenous history and issues that are still alive today?
I do, absolutely. I mean, we're in June. It's Indigenous History Month. We're approaching National Indigenous Peoples Day. These people of interest, not just in appreciating the beauty of the artwork that is hanging on the walls of the Vancouver airport, as an example, but asking questions about the history of Indigenous peoples. I mean, I am proud to be the Member of Parliament for Vancouver-Granville and knocked on thousands of doors, and people ask about Indigenous issues, they ask what they can do, and it's through that active engagement that we're going to come together and we're going to change this. And yeah, I'm optimistic, and I think people across the country are waking up to the reality and that they have a role to play in addressing it.
Still lots to learn. Jody, thank you so much for your time this morning. It was great to have you.
Thank you, and thank you for telling these stories. I really appreciate it.
All right, thank you so much. That is Jody Wilson-Raybould, MP for Vancouver-Granville. We're going to take a break.